So I know I just did a video on the AMD RX 6600, and what I originally planned was for today to do a follow-up video where we took a look at that graphics card on Steam's top 25 games. But I ended up finding such a surprise deal at Microcenter today that I had to pretty much rush over there and pick it up, and I literally just got back from the store, and I'm pretty much just going to jump right on into this because I'm really excited to take a look at it. I managed to find an open box refurbished, and it was labeled as refurbished, Radeon RX 6950X Red Devil from Power Color. And I got this for $425 essentially. Now I know that this normally wouldn't be that exciting of a price if it wasn't for two factors here. For one, the current GPU market is a disaster. Prices are all over the place, but more importantly, the new generation that has come out has effectively made prices land in a very awkward spot. Because while watching Gamers Nexus's video on the RTX 5070, I couldn't help but notice that the 6950 XT was performing at effectively the same level in raster performance, and it only ever fell behind in RT. So the fact that I could get the equivalent of a RTX 5070 for $100 less than MSRP, an MSRP that, mind you, is very difficult to find right now, this seemed like a really great deal. So I decided to jump on it, especially considering that where else am I going to find a 6950 XT that comes with a warranty? Now this is a 90-day warranty, so it's not exactly the craziest warranty out there, but I think that 90 days is more than enough time to know whether or not this GPU itself is faulty, and that's really what I'm going to be testing here, because I want to know if there is any issues with it, because this is a ridiculously cheap price that they were selling this thing for. I cannot find a used version of this GPU on eBay for anywhere near this price point, and those don't even come with a warranty. You're just trusting that some guy took care of that graphics card enough that it won't die as soon as you put it into your computer. In this case, I think I trust Microcenter just a tad bit more. Okay, I'm really excited for this because I'm a big fan of Power Color's Red Devil cards. I've been a fan of them since the RX 580. That was just such an incredible design. And well, I've never taken a look at any of their super high-end cards, and oh my god, this thing is heavy. Okay, that is a very nice back panel, but my god, this thing is heavy. This thing is chunky. Okay, so this thing is a monstrosity. It's gigantic. I'm very excited to see how this thing performs. The main reason that I'm excited, and I know that it's a multi-generation old card at this point, but it was high-end at some point. And it's interesting because the current graphics card that I have is an RTX 3070 Ti. That's my main graphics card in my PC that I use. And well, this is the first graphics card that I've taken a look at since I got that one that is more powerful than it. And yeah, it's a low bar to clear, but again, this is essentially the same thing as an RTX 5070 with, you know, some caveats there. Obviously, the RT performance on this thing is going to be significantly worse, and you also miss out on DLSS, which with the most recent version of DLSS is kind of a major hindrance. DLSS at the performance quality can look really remarkable in comparison to even FSR at ultra quality. So being able to use DLSS is a major selling point, and not having access to it is a major blow to this card in comparison to the RTX 5070. But again, this is $425 that I paid for this thing. If we can get great performance on some of the most recent titles out there, I'm going to be pretty happy with this. And realistically speaking, I'd be happy if it just gave me better performance in the titles that I specifically play, which are not the most popular or the latest titles to come out recently. But we'll dive into that a little bit more later. Right now, I want to pop it into the system. We are going to be pairing this with the Ryzen 9 7945HX, and that system does have 96 gigabytes of RAM, and that is running at 56 mega transfers, though that is at JEDEC speed. Do not expect tight timings at all, so that could be a hindrance. difference in the performance in certain titles, but overall it's still a 16-core Zen 4 based processor with a maximum clock speed of 5.4 gigahertz that it very consistently hits. So we're going to get some great performance. The CPU is not going to be a bottleneck whatsoever. So let's pop this thing in there and see what it can do. So jumping into the gaming benchmarks, the first game we're taking a look at is Rainbow Six Siege, running at 1440p with its ultra graphics settings, and we are using FSR, but it is ultra quality preset. And at these settings, the performance that we get out of this is pretty spectacular. With 1% lows of 199 and an FPS average of 247, this is going to be a perfect experience, and that shouldn't be too surprising considering the age of this title and the fact that this was a high-end graphics card when it came out. And keep in mind, I'm testing at 1440p because it does feel a little silly to even think about testing at 1080p with a graphics card like this. And look, I did want to run through a lot of the usual titles that we benchmark normally on mini PCs. One of the titles that seems to destroy most mini PC systems is Returnal. And here you can see it running at its ultra graphics settings at 1440p, but we don't have any of the ray tracing features enabled. Still, at these settings, we are able to get an FPS average of 157 with 1% lows of 97. So an absolutely rock solid result. And personally, I'd rather play a game with this level of performance instead of enabling RT and taking a pretty noticeable hit to our performance. Still, it wasn't the most ideal situation. There was an occasional stutter here and there, but overall, the numbers that we got out of this thing was just spectacular. And it's a great result considering the fact that, again, this is one of those titles that even for modern mini PCs, it can still be surprisingly demanding. One title that proved to be surprisingly demanding was Black Myth Wukong, here running at the cinematic graphics settings, so that is at its maximum graphics settings. Though we are using FSR, it is FSR with a upscale base resolution of 75%, and these are the settings that the game recommended. I decided to roll with them because they seemed reasonable enough, and after running the benchmark multiple times, it does seem to be relatively within the range of playable versus visually looking spectacular. Still, an FPS average of 44 isn't exactly ideal, and with 1% lows of 36, I completely understand if you decide to drop the graphics settings down from cinematic down to something like high. Realistically speaking, if I was going to be playing the game, that's what I would do just to get that boost in performance. But I suspect that a lot of people would be more than happy to get away with playing at an FPS average of 42, especially if they don't even have an FPS counter up. Still, this definitely shows that RT is just not an option if you plan on playing this title. Now, I'm not much of a CS player myself, but this is every single day the most played game on Steam. And because of that, I think it's important to show the level of performance that you can get out of this, and this is with the benchmark map for CS2. So do keep in mind that this is a worst case scenario. Even in this nightmare scenario, we are looking at 1% lows of 185 and an FPS average of 482. That's a pretty rock solid result, and I personally cannot be mad with this level of performance. Considering that, again, this is the most played game on Steam, that means that this graphics card should satisfy the experience of the vast majority of people. Now, I am a little weird in that I play this game at its absolute lowest graphics settings, and you might decide to not do that yourself, but you still have more than enough headroom to turn things up, considering the fact that our GPU is not even at 100% utilization all the time. So we are seeing a CPU bottleneck, even though our CPU is reaching over 5 gigahertz. Now, Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is a brand new title that just came out, and we took a look at it with the 6600, and what became very clear is that with its limited VRM budget of only 8 gigabytes, visually speaking, the game really suffered dramatically. But here at 1440p, we're able to play it at the epic graphics settings, and we are using TSR, but it's TSR at its quality setting. So that's upscaling from a base resolution of 85%. And considering that this is a turn-based title, the level of performance that we're getting out of this is more than adequate, and the best part is that visually the game looks the way that it's supposed to. And well, at this point, I'm really just testing the titles that I wanted to see. And Helldivers 2 is one of those titles that I was very curious to see what the performance would be like, because I do regularly play this game. Or at least I did for a little while. It's been a bit since I've played it, but I do still love coming back to it. And immediately, just playing on here, I could tell that this is performing significantly better than even my own desktop. Though, do keep in mind that I, for my desktop, use an ultra wide 1440p monitor, so that is 3440 by 1440, so that is a higher resolution than the 2560 by 1440 that we're running right now. But still, my RTX 3070 Ti is not able to run this game at its maxed out graphics settings with the native render resolution and get anywhere near this level of performance. I'm pretty used to getting below 60 FPS in a lot of scenarios, so the fact that it was performing this well, this is legitimately the best experience that I've ever had in Helldivers. Now, another title that I do also play on occasion is Marvel Rivals. And of course, every time I do the benchmarks, I do a bot match because I don't want to potentially affect other people's games while doing performance testing. So of course, for a system like this, that isn't necessary. The level of performance that we were getting out of this thing is spectacular. At its maximum graphics settings and using FSR at the quality preset, we are able to get an FPS average of 113 and a 1% low of 72. The performance here is spectacular, though the game itself is surprisingly demanding. Considering the type of game that it is, you'd think that a graphics card like this would perform noticeably better, but that just isn't the case. I did also take a look at Spider-Man 2, and here you can see it running with its very high graphics settings. And we are using FSR at the quality preset. And of course, all of this is at 1440p, and the level of performance that we were getting out of this was pretty solid. Again, we don't have any of the RT features enabled, and because of that, we are able to get an FPS average of 115 with 1% lows of 70. This is the best result that I've ever gotten in this specific title. This is one that is extremely demanding on all of the mini PCs that I take a look at, and even a lot of these systems with lower end graphics cards tend to struggle. But this handled this title with absolutely no problems. Testing this thing wasn't a completely smooth experience though. I did want to try out Assassin's Creed Shadows, since it is one of those titles that has a complete requirement for RT. There is no ability to turn it off, so I was curious to see what the performance was going to be like. But unfortunately, every time I tried to launch the game, it would just crash to desktop as it was loading in. There was really nothing I could do to get this thing to work. I tried reinstalling, I tried verifying its cache, I did everything, and it does not seem to function right now. I don't really know what I can do to get this thing to work. Now, I did also try out the Oblivion Remaster on here, and I was running the game at the ultra graphics settings, but I was using upscaling, so I was using FSR at the quality preset, and in all honesty, I wasn't the biggest fan of how this was performing. Or really, it wasn't the level of performance, it was visually how it looked. FSR does not look great in this title. I think specifically it's because there's so much foliage in this title, especially at these higher graphics settings, that what FSR does is it gives all of the foliage a smudge look at the edges, and it's really, really bad in motion. While you're walking around, the grass, the trees and bushes and everything kind of just look like a smudgy mess. I'm just not the biggest fan of how it looks with the FSR on. Realistically, Realistically, if I was personally going to be playing this game with this graphics card, I would likely turn down the graphics settings from ultra down to high or even down to medium so that I could avoid using FSR. I'm curious how DLSS performs on here. This is one of those things that I'm going to have to check out on the RTX 3070 Ti in comparison to the 6950 XT, because FSR just is not doing a great job here. Okay, so after testing this thing out in all of those games, some things become very apparent. For one, this thing is very powerful. It is a very, very powerful graphics card. Even today in 2025, pretty much over 3 years since the release of this card, its performance is still really great, and it mostly has to do with the fact that the market itself has stagnated pretty dramatically. You know, at $425 for this, it's not exactly the greatest deal that anybody has ever gotten on an RX 6950 XT. You know, there was a time where people were picking these up in the used market for $400 or less. But things are drastically different today, and with the current state of the market, the level of performance that we're getting out of here is pretty spectacular. I encourage you to go watch the Gamers Nexus video talking about the RTX 5070 and pay attention to where this card lands on the charts. You're going to consistently see this thing right next to the RTX 5070. And considering that the 5070 has an MSRP of $550 that you're going to have difficulty finding at consistently, I think $425 really ends up making this a very great value card. Of course, it's not a one-to-one comparison because there are certain features to the RTX 5070 that do make it a better card to consider. For one, having access to DLSS can be pretty massive, especially with the most modern versions of DLSS, where you're able to get some very incredible performance out of it, even at the lower quality settings. That could pretty much make the value of a 5070 worthwhile over this, especially if RT is something that you care about. And for me, raster is what matters 99% of the time, right? I don't really play any games that benefit from RT. You know, some of them will even have ray tracing features, but every time I enable them, I don't really notice that much of a difference visually in comparison to the performance hit. But that's with a 3070 Ti. Perhaps if I had an RTX 5070, it'll handle the RT features better, but this card definitely cannot handle ray tracing anywhere near as well as any of the 50 series of graphics cards. And you're pretty much limited to FSR in its worst implementation, since FSR 4 is locked to the most recent generation of GPUs. So even if this was a 7000 series, you still would not have access to that. So you miss out on better upscaling and you miss out on RT. And for that, you end up getting a base savings of at least $150. Realistically, it's going to be more than that because, again, where are you realistically going to find a 5070 at MSRP? Of course, I do want to compare this graphics card against my RTX 3070 Ti. So that's probably the next thing I'm going to do with this thing, but I'm really, really impressed. I'm so glad that I was able to get this through Microcenter, because having a 90-day warranty on this thing is pretty great. You know, if I was to find a similar deal to this on eBay, I wouldn't have a warranty. I'd have the return window, and outside of the return window, I'm all out of luck. Here, I get at least 3 months where if anything goes wrong with it, I can return it. And in general, Microcenter is pretty great with their open box products because all of their open box products still carry the manufacturer warranty. So if you buy an open box graphics card, you aren't losing out on having a warranty. It'll carry over for however the duration of the manufacturer warranty period would be. Of course, this is at this point more than out of warranty since it is also labeled as a refurbished card, but that does come with its own 90-day warranty, and that's more than adequate for me at the price point that I got this. So I hope that you understand why I decided to check this thing out immediately. It popped up on Microcenter. I had to go check it out literally on the same day that I got this. I just popped it in and I started messing around with it. At this point, it is getting pretty late, so I'm going to just end it here. By the way, one thing I do want to point out, this thing does have 3 power connections. You do need need at least 2, but you don't need to populate all 3 of them. Just in case if you have a power supply that doesn't have enough power connections like I do, you can get away with just using 2. But anyways, I'll catch you guys in the next one.